Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In my last video, I talked about a couple of things that are going to spill into this one. Number one, I am a big fan of the FX3. I sold my A7S III, picked up the FX3, do not regret it for a second. So if you want to hear more about that and Sony's very interesting pricing ladder that they've now built for their video cameras, you should go check out that video. I'll link it above and in the description below. The other thing that I said in that last video is in my next video, which is this video, keep up, I would talk about my function menu and the way that I have mapped that out, as well as some of the custom buttons on the camera that make shooting with the FX3 the best shooting experience that I've ever had on a camera this size. All right, let's get into the process, the function menu, and the custom buttons on this camera. Let's dive in. We've got a couple of different views. I wanted you to be able to see the top of the camera here and how I have the shutter, iris, white balance, ISO, and this dial all mapped out. They're also known as custom buttons 1, 2, 3. And then on the back, we've got custom button 5, which is focus magnification. I haven't changed that. And then custom button 4, I'll show you what I did with that one as well next to the trash can symbol, as well as how I used this dial, and then of course my front dial as well. Without further ado, let's get into it. Starting at the front, this dial here, it's pretty firm, so I'm not too worried about accidentally nudging it most of the time, and I'll take that risk, sue me. This is set to my iris, so that allows me to change my f-stop, and look, I'm not too worried about not having this button, this custom 1 button set to lock it, because again, I don't think I bump it that much, if ever. Instead, I have this custom number 1 button that's labeled iris on the body. I have it set to switch from, and watch this top corner here, top left corner of the back of the screen. I have it set to go from regular shooting mode and 24 frames per second to S&Q mode. Just like that, it goes back and forth. And if you'll notice, at the bottom left part of the screen, my shutter automatically changes with it. So we're in regular 24 frames per second, 1/48 shutter. And then when I switch, the shutter changes to 1/60. What you need to be mindful of is making sure you bump that shutter up to twice your frame rate. And so we're gonna skip ahead a little, but this back shutter button here at the bottom, this is what I have set to lock and unlock it. So I've just unlocked it, meaning I can now, there we go, now I unlocked it. I can now move my shutter up to 125 where it should be for shooting in S&Q mode, basically shooting in slow motion, and you sacrifice the sound because up here you can see it says sound is off. So that is an easy way to go into shooting slow motion strictly for B-roll purposes if you need that on the go. I like having it quick and easy, and I'll show you another level to this when we get into the function menu. For now, I'm gonna press this button, go back into 24 frames per second. Obviously, I need to bump my shutter back down to make sure it is twice that 24 frames per second, and I'm gonna go ahead and lock it by pressing this back button here. I'll also note that at the top, I have the shutter button set to start recording on this camera. It's just something I'm used to shooting on the A7 IV and A7S III, and really any kind of mirrorless body. It's just what I prefer, so I'm used to it, and it's easy to reach where I have my hand on the body. Custom button number 2, simple, white balance is what it is. For ISO, if you're shooting in Cine EI mode, you cannot press that to adjust it. I leave that basically out of use. It's just a reminder that I'm shooting in Cine EI mode if I try to do that. If I want to change the EI value at the bottom of the screen, which basically gives you a preview of what your footage would look like if you adjust the exposure in post, because your camera is only recording at the base ISOs of, again, 800 or 12,800. Right now, I'm at the base of 800, but if I were to turn this dial back here, it would show me what it looks like, what my image looks like if I overexpose a little bit and raise that exposure in post, or if I bring it down. I just have it on this dial here. Again, it's something that I don't really worry about accidentally bumping, so I'm not worried about locking that at all with any of the other custom buttons. If you look at custom button number 5 here, This is my focus magnifier, especially helps if you are shooting in manual focus, be able to punch in and get your shot nailed. I'm gonna skip the function button for now. We're gonna go down to custom button number 4, and this is what I have mapped to turn my autofocus on and off. It's really simple for me. It's the way that I've mapped most of my cameras, to have a button that's really easy to turn the focus, autofocus on and off. On my A7S III and A7 IV, there's that autofocus on button that sits up at the top right of the back of the camera. Obviously you don't have that here, so I just mapped it there instead. Comes in handy when I want to quickly switch. If you've got a better idea for how to do this though, please let me know in the comments. What you'll also notice about the way that I have all of this set up is I'm only using my right hand. There is no need for me to even stretch to go to the menu, even though I could if I wanted to, and there's certainly no need for me to stretch to press this mode button or have a second hand on the camera or anything like that. Now that we have the buttons out of the way, I'm gonna go over how I like to use this pad or joystick, whatever you wanna call it, at the top. So what I do is I have this set to cycle through all of my different focus areas. Right now it's on spot large. If I press this, it goes to expand spot, then to wide, meaning it'll autofocus all over the screen, then to zone, blocking off just this zone, then to center fix, spot small, spot medium, back to spot large. What I can also do is move this up and down and change the part of the screen that my autofocus is locked onto, and right now you can clearly see that it is on Yoda's eye. Now going back to the dial at the back of the camera and looking at the 4 different waypoints, I didn't change any of these from the way that I believe it comes out of the box. The top is set to display, so you can cycle through all of the displays. On the right side is your peaking. I can turn it on and off very easily. At the bottom, again, we went over the shutter, and at the left, your zebra, you can turn it on or off depending on what your preference is while you're shooting. But what we all came for is the function menu. That's this FN button, and it's really super convenient. It's got 10 different settings that you can map here, and you can go into your menu. If you need to map this, you press menu, you go down to this yellow screen, go over to operation customize, and then your FN menu settings. You go in there and you can map it out for photo and video function. Obviously, I'm gonna take you through the video functions because that's how I use my FX3 primarily, but if you take a lot of photos with it, it's worth putting your favorite settings there as well. The first thing, and I think this comes mapped right out of the box as well, is on the far left. That is your audio level. And the most important thing about this is while you're recording, you can't go into the menu and change your audio level. So if something's a little too hot or a little too quiet, you're gonna need to be able to change it on the go. Yes, I know, thank you FX3 for the warning, I am out of space. Point being, you can go into this function menu, and as you're recording, you can adjust your sound levels as you need to without ever having to shake the camera, pick up the camera, go into the menu, stop recording, anything like that. It is very, very simple. The next is record setting, and maybe you don't need this mapped here because you can just set it and forget it in the menu if you prefer to record in 10-bit footage or 8-bit, whatever you prefer. I prefer 10-bit, so it's nice to be able to remind myself, yes, I'm recording in 10-bit and my camera didn't do something funny and switch to 8-bit if I accidentally moved anything around. It's just a good thing to have handy. And again, reminder that I'm doing all of this with just my right hand. It is all very well within reach to get to all of the settings that are most important to me, and that's why I really do love the way that I have this thing mapped. Moving on, we go over to autofocus transition speed. This just means if you are to, say you want to rack focus and you have your autofocus set from the left to the right side of the screen, or if you're changing your autofocus points, this is just how fast it's going to do that. Below that, I have my autofocus subject shift sensitivity. Don't say a bad word there. This just means how fast your camera is going to lock on to a new subject if something comes in between you and the current subject. So in this example, we've got Yoda and it is locked onto his eye. I just changed my subject shift sensitivity all the way up to the top level of 5. So that means if I stick my hand in front of there, it is automatically just really quickly gonna lock right onto my hand, but then it's gonna go right back to Yoda. However, if I were to turn this down to locked on at number 1, it's gonna take a little bit longer before it pulls to my hand. There we go, and a little bit longer before it goes back to Yoda. That is something that can come in handy if you like to rely on the autofocus in the field and you're worried about something coming in between you and your subject. I usually keep it set to about 3 or 4. Moving over your record frame rate, a really quick way just to go from 120, 24, 30, 60 frames per second, depending on your preference, depending on how you're shooting. The next one is your S&Q frame rate. Maybe I'm setting myself up for failure putting them next to each other, but I think I'm good here just because this is the even 60 while your record frame rate is 59.94. Point being, this is how I can go in and change my S&Q frame rate, or excuse me, S&Q frames per second from 60 to 120, 30, whatever I desire. And that again is with this top button, the custom button number 1, where iris is, that is my S&Q button. So right now I have it set to, if I press this top button, it drops me to 60 frames per second slow motion, which is about 2.5 times slow. But if I were to go into my function menu and change this to 120 and press this top button, now I am at 120 frames per second when I'm shooting in S&Q mode. And again, make sure you adjust this shutter. It will automatically move it to match your frame rate, but you want to make sure that you are double that with your shutter speed. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn this off, go back to regular shooting mode in 24 frames per second. Moving on, face and eye priority and autofocus, an easy way to turn that on or off if you want to track faces or not. You can also change your peaking level. This doesn't turn it on or off, but simply changes your peaking from high to medium to low. And if you pay attention to this, when it's high, look at all of the red that it shows. It's saying all of that's in focus. I don't know if I believe that, and I don't know that you should always trust it. Middle, a little less, and then low. This is the least amount of peaking that it's gonna show. So this should show up only on the parts that are truly, truly in focus. Again, it's always a good idea to use the focus magnifier if you're shooting in manual focus, and maybe look in a little tighter and make sure you are good to go. Moving back down your record media settings, I like this one because it allows me to go in and, depending on if I'm running out of card space or if I need to change how I'm recording, I typically record in simultaneous on photos and video, but if I needed to change it to slot 1 or slot 2 for any reason, I could do that and get to that in the menu very quickly just by going there and making the change. Next up is steady shot. I keep my camera in active. I do a lot of run and gun, not a whole lot of gimbal work, so it pretty much lives in active. But if you notice, you go back to steady and you don't have that crop in that active gives you. I just gotten used to it by now. Maybe if I'm on a gimbal, I'll put it in steady, but for now, we rock in active. Moving on down the menu, we already went over autofocus subject shift sensitivity. I'm very careful with that. The next is select your LUT. I don't have any LUTs loaded into this camera right now for shooting in log. However, I just keep it in your regular Rec 709 preview. If you like looking at a grayed out S-Log3 screen, you could switch it to that as well. And then obviously you can load in your custom LUTs up to 16, I believe. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. A7S III doesn't have that, FX3 does. That's why I switched to this camera, and I have a video on that. And then finally, your base ISO. This is where I can simply switch from 800 to 12,800. Obviously, very, very overexposed here, but it's a simple way to get up and down when you're shooting in Cine EI mode. I definitely recommend rocking an ND filter if you're going to be using this mode and sticking to the base ISOs and knowing how much you like to push your footage in post. And that's it. It's really pretty simple when you think about it, because we're only talking about a handful of buttons on the camera body itself, and then 10 different functions within that function menu that can really make the shooting process a lot easier. If you found this video helpful at all, which I hope you did, please hit that like button. Also, if you don't mind, subscribe while you're down there. We're really trying to grow the channel out in 2023, and I will see you in the next video.